Welcome back to TCM.
Thank you.
I'm here with Delroy Lindo, who we've seen most recently in Ryan Coogler's Sinners.
Indeed.
We're about to watch Malcolm X. And some people might think, why are you showing Malcolm X on Martin Luther King Day? It seems like a natural thing to me because these are two figures who represent a much bigger movement and who are not as diametrically opposed as I think many people
Would like them to be.
Sure.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
And I think that the theme of these three films, very consistent because in its own way, this film, Malcolm X, is documenting a man and a time that spoke to the social, political, and cultural dynamics of the time.
Yes.
So very, very consistent from that standpoint.
Yeah. You've made 4 films with Spike Lee.
I have.
This is the first one.
Yep.
You also worked with him on Crooklyn,
Clockers,
and
The Five Bloods.
Yes.
Yes.
Kind of a 20-year space between those last two.
Right.
But let's go back to your first experience working with Spike Lee. Talk about how you were cast in the role and what it was like working with him.
I'm not answering your question chronologically because one of the things that I remember keenly from working on the film, there were all these black technicians, there were all these black people behind the camera. I had never seen that many black people working on a film. Spike Lee. And that was so inspiring. There was an unspoken agreement. And if ever you speak with Spike, you should ask him this because it was something I was aware of. There was this tacit understanding working on that film that everybody, you had to bring your A game. You had to bring your A game to the work, to the process. And everybody in front of and behind the camera did just that. To your question, how I was cast. Fortunately for me, Spike, this was the second time Spike was coming to me. I had been asked to audition for Do the Right Thing, and I had declined. He came back to me for Malcolm X. And having been in school with Denzel and I were both students at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, getting the opportunity to work with Denzel in my audition was tremendous. So I remember auditioning with Denzel. We read 1 or 2 scenes between Malcolm and West Indian Archie. And very soon thereafter, I got the part. It was very special for me on a number of levels. One of them was getting to play a Jamaican man on film. I'm Jamaican. I'm from a Jamaican family. And I considered that to be, I was paying homage to my mom, my own history, my mom's history. And then the content of the scenes themselves, beautiful. And I always recognized, and it has proven to be the case, that there was a certain kind of a wholeness to the way in which the character existed in the script. So you asked me about being cast. There were so many memories that I had. There were so many, your synapses are just firing because there's so much going on and you want to do really well. And I remember I'd never met Spike before working on the film. There was just an openness and a trust that he had in me.
It sounds like just a remarkable creative environment.
Similarly to Sinners, in as much as it represented a cultural moment, right? And to be in a film like that, I had worked in film prior to Malcolm X, but Malcolm X was the first film that started to establish me as a film actor after essentially 10 years of working in New York as a theater actor. And that film kind of catapulted me into another sphere creatively as a film actor.
Your performance in this film, it's 5 or 6 scenes, I'm not sure, but they are so essential to understanding Malcolm X's transformation, his journey, yes, but also thinking about the possibilities for Black men during this era.
Oh my God. I had read Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X many years prior to doing the film. When I was cast in the film, I read the book again. And one of the things that I recall Alex Haley remarking about West Indian Archie, my ability to never write the numbers down, right? Always keep it in your head, which possibly speaks to having a photographic memory, but this is a man who had the intellectual capacity to be working, I don't know, if we think about 2026, Google, Apple, working those kinds of jobs. And it speaks to the lack of opportunity that resulted in him doing what he did, running numbers. Again, very contemporary from that standpoint, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. When we first meet West Indian Archie, after Malcolm has hit this guy over the head with a bottle.
Yeah.
The debonaireness, right? Just the fierceness that he has, understated, the style. Your costuming by Ruth Carter, for example, is just
I loved everything about it.
incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you were drawing from as you were characterizing West Indian Archie in his sort of glory moment, and then when he has his
At the end.
downfall, I guess you
Yeah.
could call it.
In addition to reading the book, I wrote a personal biography of West Indian Archie's life. The full name, Archie Darrell Brown. That was my name. And I asked Ruth to monogram my shirts.
Wow.
Archie Darrell Brown. And I wrote a biography about my life, up to and including Malcolm walking in. I knew everything that I had done up to and including that day.
Wow.
Meeting Malcolm. That was how detailed. But I felt that I had to, because I had to bring my A game. I had to.
And to be clear, we don't get those details in the autobiography of Malcolm X. We get the name, we get that he worked for him as a numbers runner, but we don't really know.
It was all for me. It was all for my own process as an actor. What's always kind of sort of astounded me is that West Indian Archie is in the film for 12 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
The power of the character in that narrative has to do with the fact there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to the journey. And that final scene, likewise, I had worked very, very specifically and very, very intentionally on. In the script, it said that when Malcolm came to visit me, West Indian Archie was near death. And I said to Spike, what does that mean? What do you mean? What's wrong with West? And he said, I don't know, you work on it. I decided that I had had a stroke. So I went to Kings County Hospital in New York. They had a ward in which there were patients recovering from stroke, and I just observed. And I must have visited, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and I was just taking in and hoping that by osmosis, if nothing more than by osmosis, something would resonate for me, something would, and it did. By the time we shot the scene in the SRO, I was clear. I didn't know what would happen in the scene, but I was clear about how I wanted to work on it. I was clear about how I wanted to approach the work. And the fact that so many people speak about that scene, that particular scene, as the completion of West Indian Archie's journey, and just the joy that I had, just Denzel and I being able to work together as we did in that film.
Incredible. So the next film we're going to talk about is Uptight from 1968. This is a film directed by Jules Dassin, and it's essentially a remake of John Ford's The Informer, except what he does is instead of talking about the Irish Revolution for independence, it's set in terms of the Black Power movement. Now, this is a film that's rarely seen. I think you recently saw it for the first time.
Yes, I was not familiar with this film.
What were some of your impressions of this film?
Once again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but very much a film that very much speaking to the dynamics of the time. And I read that the director, Jules Dassin, had been blacklisted.
That's right.
And had moved to Europe, I think France, and then ended up in Greece, I believe, ultimately. For some for some reason, that stuck with me because for me, it fed right into what must have been the tenacity of the filmmakers to tell this particular story at this particular time. When Julian Mayfield's character and Max Julian,
Oh, Max Julian, yes.
he said, "I love you, man." The other guy said, "I love you, man." The tenderness between these men in amongst all of this turmoil. So very, very much for me, a film contemporary in the sense that it is speaking to the socio-political and cultural dynamics of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this film opens with the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
That's right.
And to think about the fact that that happened in April 1968, this film is released in December of 1968, there's a real immediacy to it.
I hope I am not getting into trouble here, but I worked recently with a lady who had worked with Ozzy and Ruby. I think she worked either as their assistant or as their archivist. The fact that Dr. King was assassinated in April, that was not part of the film. That was not part of the journey. And the fact when Dr. King was assassinated, I think they ended up filming in Memphis. That was not the original location for the film. And that then becomes the point of departure for the narrative, and must have infused everybody connected with that film with an extra sense of mission to tell the story that they were telling.
Yeah. I know that we often think about the 1970s so-called blaxploitation era where many Black actors and writers and some directors were getting opportunities. This was made in 1968, so it's
Right.
before that movement. So this film has such a remarkable cast. Ruby Dee, who co-wrote the film, Raymond St. Jacques, the
Right.
two actors you were talking about, Julian Mayfield and Max Julian. It's just extraordinary.
Right. The coming together of all of that talent and the coming together of the idea that we are the intensity of the mission, the intensity of the objectives in making and telling a story like that. Very much of its time.
Yeah, yeah. And the question of what direction do we take now that Dr. King
That's right.
is gone?
That's
Yeah,
right.
They're really struggling
That's
with
right.
this, yes. Yeah.
Which is also very contemporary because as we sit here in 2026 and I think we're all faced with how do we individually and or collectively respond to this moment in history that we're living in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Uptight is a film I mentioned previously. Very few people, I think, really appreciate what the filmmakers were trying to do. It's a film that we haven't talked about that much, and yet it is so rich. But I'm curious about what you think about how the film ends and what happens to Tank as someone who has betrayed his brother, but at the same time, he loves his brother, and the community, has to figure out how to deal with that.
That dichotomy.
Yeah.
And I think when I see Tank standing, he was announcing himself
Yeah.
to the people who I'm assuming he realizes are going to kill him. And he's announcing himself and making that sacrifice, right? And, we were speaking about Sinners earlier. And for me, playing Delta Slim and the fact that ultimately I make a choice to sacrifice myself for a greater good.
Yeah.
And also recognizing that Preacher Boy will carry that legacy on. There's an element of handing the baton to Preacher Boy, which is one of the main reasons that he needs to be saved. And I have to tell you this, that was not in the original draft that Ryan sent me.
Really?
It was not. I remember reading the draft that he sent me, and I emailed Ryan back and I said, these are the things that I'm seeing in this story. And Ryan wrote me back and he said, yes, you're right. I was aware that Ryan was using a particular genre to tell a much larger story. But I said, man, Delta Slim has such a dynamic introduction, but he kind of falls off in the second act of the film. And Ryan said, I agree with you, and we will work on making his presence. He will be more present as the story unfolds, and so the various scenes that he wrote for me in the second act of the film, these were all things we came up with, that Ryan came up with, that we came up with during the shoot itself, including that final act when I sacrifice myself.
Yes, it's such a remarkable moment. I want to ask you one last thing, which is on this day, on Martin Luther King Day, we've been talking about how so many of the issues that he was speaking about, that Malcolm X was speaking about, that the artists we've been talking about have been conveying in their work, that they're still so prescient today. And I know it can seem sometimes really daunting, especially for our young people, and there can be a lot of anger, frustration. And I wonder what kind of advice you share with young people as they think about navigating the ongoing complexities of our time.
The first thing I am compelled to say is that I, on many levels, are just as challenged and confused about this time as anybody else. But I can't afford to indulge my confusion. I can't afford to indulge my fear because of the young people. I have a 24-year-old son. And for the young people, I would say, you're entitled to your confusion. You're entitled to your rage. And it's the challenge that we all are faced with. The challenge is to find constructive ways of channeling the fear, constructive ways of challenging our confusion. And we are all compelled, each in our own individual ways, to come up with answers for ourselves and live that.
Yes.
I would say that one of the things that's most important for me in 2026, my family, my friends, my work, and infusing all of my relationships with as much as I can to keep us moving forward. It's what Malcolm represented, it's what Dr. King represented, and we each must find our ways of moving ourselves forward. It's not easy, and I'm clear about that, and I have to say that I am confused and I'm afraid. However, I also know that ultimately the mandate for all of us is to define for ourselves what progress looks like and be about the business of engaging that.
That's beautifully put. And your work points us, I think, in the right direction.
Thank you.
You bring such humanism to the characters that you portray.
Thank you.
It has been an honor to speak with you
Likewise.
tonight. Thank you so
I'm
much
really,
for
really
being
happy to
here.
have been here. Thank you, Jacqueline.